Welcome back, everyone, from that short break. We are now swiftly moving on to the second session of the day. And I'm fortunate to be allowed to present Karen. My name is Svein. I work at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, and I'm also the deputy chair of Lean HE Europe. So as John has already indicated, the next session was also presented at the conference in San Diego in October. And it's going to be presented by Karen Kusler from University of Texas at Arlington in the USA. Now, I've had the pleasure of meeting Karen on several occasions and been able to learn also from Karen and her team directly. Karen is the manager of the business improvement team, which she started at UTA back in 2017. And now there's a staff of 5 working on campus-wide projects and addressing department process improvement needs. Karen worked in higher education for 40 years, with the last 20 years in roles focused on guiding teams to improve processes. She has taken part of that experience of teamwork, understanding our culture and the barriers faced in improvement efforts to create a tool that provides a structure for instance, a division, a college, a department to build a process improvement roadmap. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Karen, and the title, Building a Process Improvement Roadmap, Who, What, When, and How.
Thank you so much. That was such a kind introduction. I appreciate it. So I will first do this disclaimer. I seldom use Zoom. I'm a Teams user, so this is going to be a bit of a challenge with the technology. So please be patient with me. So I'm going to try to get my PowerPoint up. And okay, there we go. So you should see it as the presentation now. Are we all good?
Karen, we can now see the view that you have. So if you look at the top of your screen now, you could go to display settings and press switch. Swap presenter, yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
There you go.
Okay. I am lucky enough to work with these two ladies. Misty Mascal is a news person that joined our team, and she actually now has the responsibility for the process we're talking about today. And then Tabitha Wiles has been with my team for a little while, so I'm very excited to be able to work with them. Then we also have a special guest here that has been using this tool for about 1.5 years, and she's going to share her experience. I'm going to run through a little bit about what our campus is. Our title is Change and Process Improvement Team now. Since October, it was changed. We have a campus of about 50,000 students, 11 academic colleges, and we do 100+ campus projects a year. We're not necessarily involved with all those projects, but we touch at least half of them every year, if not more. The services we provide is that we are working those campus projects. We're also doing educational programs that focus on process improvement and change management. And we have a whole series of those. And then we work with these process improvement roadmaps. So the why we were looking at doing this, when I was hired on in 2017, the CIO kept saying, we need to identify the business owners for our processes. People are not taking accountability, responsibility for their processes. We need to do this. I'm going, okay, there's one of me. Okay, let's figure out how to do this, you know. And we kept trying different things and so on. And then it just kept, we started getting people thinking about processes instead of just work. And so we started getting people to where they were starting to understand that, but they weren't quite getting all the way. They weren't seeing value streams and stuff like that. So we also didn't have operating procedures. Metrics was unheard of at that time. And so it was a lot of uphill battle. But what we finally did in about 2019 to 2020, we started playing around with this tool about how can we put together something that will help them understand what they are responsible for and how they need to progress with improvements. And so that's how this tool started. We looked at what was out in the industry. Nothing really fit higher ed. Higher ed, you can't go too fast, and you'll see as I go through the presentation how we've even adjusted to the pace of higher ed better. So, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to define what the processes are, and then we also link the supporting material right there in one source. And then as we're building the tools, there's a schedule developed to make sure we stay on track. So let's talk about our versions. So 2020, we piloted with the HR department a version that was extremely complex. It had all of the different things of process name, owner, and all that. But then also we had all this rating scale for structure and performance and deliverables. Do you have your SOPs? Is a hierarchy set? Is compliance set? Now, all of these things are great. We like having that information. But to ask someone to do that when they're just learning what a process is was difficult. So we've gone through many versions. Our 5th version since October is that we have 2 phases now. We have basic columns of what is a process, but phase 1 is just working on SOPs, who's the owner, and cross-training. Phase 2 comes in from metrics, process work, and some of the other things. And so that's what I'm going to share today, is how we've really set it up to where departments can adapt this over time. Now, we had a new president. We have a new provost, student affairs. All of these people are new in the last year and a half. It's lots of change happening at once, because when you have new leadership, they come in and they want to change things. Our department, our division has reorged. And so now, since October, we have a new supervisor. So there's lots of changes happening on campus. This actually is a positive for this effort, because everybody's changing. They're looking for, how do we do this? So now we're getting them to do the foundation work of, this is what your documentation is for your processes, how you can talk to your leaders about what your department does. So it's been a very beneficial thing. Okay. Sorry. Runny nose today. So who have we been working with? So far, we have worked with 8 different departments, and we're starting work with the Division of Enrollment Management. Now, if you'll notice here, it's colleges and divisions. These are large groups and with many teams that we're working with. They're not just going into one department, like into budget and working with their area. We would go into financial services and work with payroll and budget and all of those areas. So the colleges, as you can see, have really picked up on this of, hey, this is going to help us. We have these shared services that we're doing, and we need consistency. And we need ways to tell the people we're servicing what we can do and what we cannot do. And so they've been really finding this very useful. We're about to kick off for the whole Division of Enrollment Management. We have a new vice president in that area, and so I'm really excited about that. Our role is not to do the work for them. Our role is to provide them a structure, to motivate them to do the work, getting that buy-in, helping them see the value, to visualize some of the work that they're doing, and coaching them. And we're going to talk about how we've evolved with some of these things also in coaching. We reflect on every experience. Every experience is a little bit different because our audience is different. Like financial services wants to approach things a certain way. As long as they keep a foundation, then that works. But then each college wants to approach things a little bit differently too. And so we're finding how to adapt with the clients as we're working with them. But our role is to facilitate, not do the work. So one of the first things we do is we talk to them about what a process is and what process streams are. And so this is one of our common slides that we use. And I know it's a little hard to read, but with some of the small text, but basically, you chunk your process stream up, then that you're doing the process of position budgeting, or position posted, or applicant accepts. And those are many sub-processes that would fall in here. So for those shared services, the administrative staff might only work in getting the position posted. They're not going to mess with the interviews. That's going to be a different group. They might be involved in getting them into the system. They might be doing the paperwork session. So this way you get just the people working in that area involved with the discussion. But this is the level of process we want them to put on their process inventory to build the roadmap. To give them perspective, we tell them that if you were out of the office for 2 months on sick leave, which processes would need to be addressed by others? What do they need to know to avoid a ridiculous workload when you return? Okay, so for 2 months, if you're going to be gone, what needs to be covered? And then providing enough detail to do that. We want consistency. We want it to be where every employee is doing the basics. And if you need to pick up the workload for someone because all of a sudden they went out on sick leave for 2 months, you know where they're at in that step. So we want to provide consistency. Some of the value of the improvement roadmap, process improvement roadmap, is it does define the processes. I'm going to go through this quickly because I know I'm talking to practitioners. Defining the process, identifying existing documentation, trying to determine what the additional documentation needs to be. Is it just an SOP? Is there a policy tied to it? What do we need to attach to it for someone who is working with it? Then assigning those tasks to who is the owner of that process. The owner of that process does not mean the manager of that department. It can be delegated to an employee, and we're going to show how we've done that. Facilitating improvement efforts for the process that needs to be streamlined. Once we get the process inventory in place, then we can see where the real pain points are instead of it just being observed. So now we're getting into the how to do this. When you have your kickoff for this, we want to include our leadership. If it's with a college, we'd love to have that dean go in there. And, I forget that I'm talking with different audiences. Let me explain what the college and university setup is in our campus. We have the university, but within the college, we have schools, what you might call schools. So it's areas of common study areas, and they call them colleges here. So I apologize, I didn't think about that earlier. I remember one time I was doing a presentation, I was talking about football, and everybody was scratching their head, and they're, football? That's not football, it's American football. But you want to include leadership, have them speak about how valuable this is and that they're behind this. They want you to do a good job with it and focus on the work. We want the champion. There needs to be a champion in each area that's going to help push that on through, because we're facilitating. They're responsible. And then the process workers, those people who are going to be doing the work, they need to hear this from the leadership and such. So it's a common setup of a kickoff meeting. We would facilitate that, but it would be just guiding them through the structure of how we're going to go about it. We include the leadership comments, overview of what the tool is. This is what we're going to do. What kind of questions do you have? Where is it confusing for you? We train them on the process versus task. And this is a new thing. We've always just done that little process map, but now we've identified we need to incorporate in there some really detailed training about what is a process versus the task you do at your desk. Because so many of the employees who are working on this are very task oriented. Okay, I have 5 requisitions to process to get purchase orders prepared, or I need to get 4 employees in the system for hiring to teach this fall. So that's their task, but they're not thinking of it as a process of what happens before and what happens afterwards to make sure that they're providing the right information. So we want to get them moving from process to process thinking versus task thinking. And then we share the layout of a Microsoft team. We are a Microsoft team campus, and we store all of the files in there while we're working on it. Once we finish with the work, then the department takes that and puts it in a shared location for their employees. But while we're in progress, we keep it in this Microsoft team. And then we review that schedule for the project. So it's a typical thing, but we add in that little bit of training because we need to get them in the mindset to do this work. So I'm going to pause at this time to see if anybody has any questions. You can come off mute or you can put them in chat.
At this time, there's no questions in the Q&A, and then that's a fine point for me also to remind people that you could always put your questions in the Q&A tool.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So Misty, as I said, is new to our team, and she was hired just to coordinate all of the efforts tied to the process inventories, which builds into the roadmaps. And so she's the one that manages this project for us. So she goes and does the kickoff meetings. She sets the schedules. She is the one that's helping push it on through. Occasionally, we have to help her out because of the workload. So Tabitha has been very involved as being her backup. And so first, Misty is going to share with you phase 1.
Hello. Thank you, Karen. So we have our roadmap set in Excel. It just works easy for us when we have to filter. The first sheet, which is not shared on here, actually lists the instructions in more detail than what we have right here, and it also includes the legends. We just have that there for as they're working on the process when we're not with them, that they can easily reference that. So here on the second sheet is our phase 1. As you can see, we have our first row, which is our headers. And then the second row underneath that is just a brief description of what we want for that header. So we have the category, which is the big bucket of the process or the type of work that we want them to put in. Sometimes this works really well with the group. Sometimes it can be confusing, so we might hide it and bring it back later. Then we have the process name. You will find that this might seem redundant, but it's not, because with the groups that I've been working with, sometimes they don't actually have a name for their process. Like Karen was saying, they're more focused on the task of, oh, it's the blue form, let's just do everything. So sometimes this really helps them bring things into perspective. Then our next column is the process function. It's just a description of what they need to do for the process. And sometimes this can be a high level description that they will use later, possibly when creating the SOP if needed. Then the next column is the is the product service recipient. So this is just basically who this process impacts when they do it. Would it be faculty? Would it be staff? Would it be their department? Would it be a student? So once they've completed all of these columns, then we move on to, okay, does this process has a SOP or a procedure guide? And we have a drop-down menu, and it's locked so they can't change it or override it, where they can select exists and good, exists and needs revisions, does not exist, or not needed. And we do emphasize that if they do have a process that does not need an SOP, that they indicate this so that when we're reviewing and helping them, it's not left blank and there's no misunderstanding, was this completed or not completed? So the needs revisions and does not exist is really good to have for the due date. So we can filter to determine priority. So maybe something that doesn't exist has a higher priority of getting completed than maybe something that needs revision. And so we have the space for them to put a due date on when they want this to be completed by. And then we also have a space for them to link the SOP directly into this document so that if somebody is a new hire and they're coming on and they need all the categories for accounting, they could filter accounting, see what the processes they need, and then find the link directly here instead of having to come out of this and try and find it wherever it's shared. Then at the end part, we have the RACI chart. So in our header, we have it listed as name and role, and we just have that here as a security reason. So if the person leaves, we don't want to necessarily be like, oh, that used to be Jane who did it, who does it now? We've attached it also with the role so that if somebody leaves, they can be like, oh, the admin one does the admin processes. And this also has a drop down option, and we also have it locked as well. So we have the R for responsible, which for us is the process worker. A is accountable, which is the lead or the owner. The C is consulted, which usually is the person who you need to contact if there's an escalation. And then we have informed of maybe for cross training, who needs to be informed if this process has been changed.
Okay, great. And because our campus is so heavy with accessibility, we have listed the title headers above in bigger font so that you can see what the headers are. So if you wonder what that's about. The process name is process function is very helpful for leadership because the process worker may list it as a certain name that they don't recognize, but the function will give them a description to know what the focus is. So that's one of the values of that. Thank you, Misty.
Thank you, Karen.
You're going to continue and talk a little bit more about this.
Yes, so we've decided to pull an example of the RACI chart. As you can see, it's kind of different. We try to evolve and meet the department with their needs when working with them. And so for this RACI chart, it was broken down into, color-coded into role and department. And what we did was we held this session in person and we put all of our little sticky notes on the wall that listed all of the processes that the upper leadership of that department had sent over. And we had them work together as teams to determine which roles are they responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. And the A's are highlighted because as the accountable, whether it's the owner or the lead, depending on how they wanted to use the terminology in the department, this is the person who's going to be responsible for updating the SOP and making sure that it's consistent, any changes that need to be done, all of that paperwork. That's one of their primary responsibilities for the process. And then those who are the R's, that are the process workers, know, hey, this isn't working or this is missing something. They can go to the person that is marked the A and be like, I've seen this issue, or maybe can we talk about this? And then they can work to update the SOP.
Okay, good. Just a few other little points. In our example here, you'll see it's just Vicky Financial. We normally would have the role. The idea of adding the role happened after we did this exercise. And so that's why we don't have all of those roles in there. We did remove their last names. And this is the RACI chart is something we've added since October when we presented. And it was added because a college was just struggling with identifying who was going to maintain those SOPs. So we thought, how do we get them to talk about this and take ownership? And so going to this RACI chart, it also shows our cross-training needs. So you can see here, relocation procedures, we only have 2 people doing that. That would be a discussion. Is that sufficient? Do we need to have more people? And so I think that Tabitha was going to share a little bit more about the RACI chart also.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Thanks, Misty. So one thing we noticed, as Karen and Misty both mentioned, we just started this RACI chart because we did see a lot of resistance with accountability and confusion. And since we did this in person, we did have quite an adventurous discussion, and we did see some duplication. So within those in-person sessions, we were able to make some decisions on who was going to be accountable. And we did color code each of the individuals kind of in groups to further highlight within those areas the specialty people that needed to, or departments that needed to be a little bit more responsible. So I think this was really helpful, and this is part of the reason why we have incorporated this in our newer version, because we are working with departments that Karen mentioned are task-oriented, maybe struggle a little bit with ownership, maybe have had a lot of turnover. And so we found a lot of success even through that in-person discussion, duplication. We were making decisions, people felt empowered. So it was really quite a great experience. We found success. So Karen, if you wouldn't mind going to phase 2.
Okay. Maybe. Here.
So Misty talked a lot about phase 1, and what we've seen is that groups spend a lot of time, energy processing what are SOPs, how the department functions with tasks. And going into phase 2, which was originally bucketed on one single document, we found to be very overwhelming. And so departments generally need to sit with phase 1, developing those SOPs, really working to ingrain that in their culture for about a year, sometimes 2 years. And then they're often ready for phase 2. So we've made a separate phase to not overwhelm various groups and really set the foundation, because these SOPs do inform these other pieces of documentation and that strategy planning on this phase 2. So something to note, we do have the category and process name automatically carrying over from that phase 1 sheet. We're all process people. We don't want to duplicate work, add defects. So we did want to make sure that we were working smarter and not creating extra work for the groups that we're working with. The accountable owner. So because we're deciding the RACI on the previous phase, once we get to this phase 2, that accountable person will be input here on this accountable owner. We didn't want to pull that in automatically since that's still being decided. We might have groups with more individuals, more discussion, etc. So that is something that we work on when we start phase 2. And then we begin with the drop downs again for process work, training course, and metrics. So originally we had cross training here, but that RACI chart really addresses cross training on who we have. So really this phase 2 sheet is working on that strategic planning and roadmap for the department. So with process work, training course, and metrics, we did find groups have a lot of questions, again, with these task-oriented workers on what some of these things are. So we went ahead and added descriptions to provide those visual cues on what each of these things are. And so within each of these, we still have that drop-down menu to kind of highlight what we have, don't have, and then of course that prioritization with the due date. And as you can see in the gray column to the far right, we do also link that SOP. That's automatically populated because as we work on this process work, training course, or metrics, we want to reference our current SOP documentation because it informs the rest of these. So something else to note is with either of these phases, we often schedule working sessions. So depending on the group and their schedule, they might need an hour working session every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Though we generally recommend they spend an extra hour every week working on their own. And often what we have found is some groups really want to externally process as they're figuring how to document processes, work through conceptualizing each of these other pieces of documentation. And so we might recommend they work together in that extra hour and then come back to our group with questions. And we have found that to be very successful. We'll be available for questions, support, if they need a little nudging, coaching, or guidance. we do that as well. But so far, we've seen a lot of success in this approach.
Thank you. We find that this is very helpful in breaking it up in 2 phases because they see a milestone with the SOPs and the RACI chart that they've reached an accomplishment. Now, right now, we're working on this longer time period. We do hope it will speed up. We do hope they'll be ready to do phase 2 quicker, but they're kind of exhausted after they've gone through and done the processes. So they need a break. So we're hoping that we can get back in there. But what we do find is that the really big pain points are highlighted just through the SOP and the RACI chart things. So we may start some process work. But what I also find is that they start doing some of the small process work. We do a lot of training on how to identify what the problem is and how to structure to work with that problem through some educational programs. And the people who work with the process inventory tend to participate in those. And so they're ready to do some of those small things of, this is not really working, so let's fix this, and can do those small little projects, because there's no way we can do it all. So we want to empower them to do that. The work sessions that Tabitha was talking about, I was really impressed. This was Misty and Tabitha's idea, and I was very impressed. They just get on the line. Everybody is just silent working, and then somebody will pop up with a question, but it designates on their calendar, we've got this work time, and I'm in a meeting, so I can't be disrupted. So that really seems to help a lot. And they had good participation in that. It's voluntary. They could do it on their own, but they had good participation in that. So before I go on, are there any questions at this time?
Karen, we do have a mention in the chat, and I think it's kind of a thought and a question about thinking about a process as opposed to just a task means there would be more of a joined up thinking and less of a silo mentality. And I think that's part of that RACI, right? And why we struggled with these task-oriented groups to determine accountable, responsible. And then now we're seeing more collaboration and really external processing with the group. And so I'll let you kind of continue to answer, but yes, I think that to a degree is true.
As they're working on their SOP, and everybody has different structures, and we're happy to share our structure, but in that we ask them to think about what is upstream and what is downstream from what their SOP is addressing. And so that brings in some of those discussions. At this time, we have not found that they are going and doing collaboration across function areas unless it's within their team. Within their department, but that's something that I hope will happen. It also highlights when we find that everybody is putting in that they have issues with some aspect of hiring, then it highlights that maybe we need to pull together something and pull that collaboration together to work on it. We do find that the people who are working on the SOPs are reaching out to the central university services for clarification and help on what they are getting inputs as and what they need returned to them. Because when you're doing something with a budget transfer, they're asked, you have an input of, we need these funds moved to this account, and it needs to go over to budget. They're getting lots of clarification. So they're going out and asking questions, but it's not formal meetings. If that helps. Is there any other questions at this time?
Not at this time, Karen.
Okay. So the timeline that we work with, the first month is just making that process list and what the function is. We don't ask for a lot, just what the process list, the function. And when we talked about, I can't remember exactly how we titled it, but it's basically the customer who benefits from this service that we're doing. And if you can get those 3 columns done in the first month, then you've really accomplished a lot, because they still have their day job. That's why Tabitha was saying, designate an hour to work on this once a week. That doesn't sound like a lot of time, but some of them have trouble finding that hour. So, so that's one of the first things is in the first month, we're going to do that kickoff and then have them do that process list. Month 2 is where we come in, then we're using that process list for RACI chart. Now, this is something, this whole process list is not written in stone at month 1. If we identify other things that need to be added, we'll add them. And we do the RACI chart. We meet with the teams to complete the documentation analysis, assign those tasks. We touch base at least every 2 weeks, sometimes weekly, it all depends. And then month 3 through 6, we're working with the sponsor or that champion at least once a month of how do we motivate the individuals who are not doing their part, and just keeping touch base with them. Again, we're not doing any of the work, we're facilitating them to do the work. And that was something that was initially questioned, but it's like, we don't know your processes. You have to do this. We can help you with structure. The very final thing is you end up with an index of all your processes and all the documentation, and that's when we have them put it in whatever location works best for them, and then we close the project out. So we're finding also that we will continue meeting with the champion for about 6 months after that project is closed, just to make sure that if they have issues come up, we're there for them. We don't want them to feel like they have to reach out to us to get help, but we go to them and touch base. It's all in one document, process index. Missing documents are identified with that exists and needs revision and does not exist. Like Misty said, that's where we're going to focus on the work that needs to be done. And then reviews and updates need to be scheduled. And we're going to touch a little bit on that. But, you know, what's the schedule of that? If there's a change in policy or procedure, how do we do the updates? So that's some of the sustainability. We are not dictating a lot of that. We give recommendations, but we're letting the department identify what works best with their culture. With the next steps, leadership in that department needs to refer to that process index regularly. In the staff meetings and their strategy discussions, they need to refer to it. It needs to be a talking point in the place of truth, the place of information. Utilizing the resource for training new employees, orientating supervisors, all those new supervisors, being able to give them something that they can kind of go through and get an idea, or that you can take and simplify in some kind of report, would be extremely helpful instead of having to go from scratch. And then it does align employees' responsibilities. If we find that one person is going to end up being accountable for the majority of the processes, we need to look at some alignment to ensure the sustainability of those processes. And then, as I've already talked about, sustaining the resources through the reviews and updates. Okay, and we have a special guest with us, Teresa Ross, who participated in the process inventory with College of, I always mess up, it's an architecture college. And I always mess up on the name of it. It's called Kappa. And she's going to talk about the experience that they went through, and they completed theirs a year ago, their process inventory. And so it's been a year later. I walked through the office when I was back on campus in April, and it was just like, wow. Everybody was saying, this is great. So Teresa's going to share with us her experience.
Yes. Hello, everybody. I'm at the College of Architecture, Planning, and Public Affairs. Public Affairs and Planning would be upset if their names were left out. So that's where I am. So I thought we did this about a year and a half ago. It was around December, January. It's been a while. And it is time for us to review them. We were part of the first, how are you described it? The first group,
phase.
Yeah, the first phase. That was definitely more complicated than your second phase, which I want access to those documents because we have some SOPs that we really need to do for processes that happen once a year. And so it's like, okay, now how did I do that? Where do I start? And this really became apparent I guess it was back in February when we had a study away for the semester. And actually it was December, January, because it was this spring semester where we had a group of students that went to Austria for the semester. And things weren't done in the right order. And we discovered that really, really quickly, and we did not, allow enough time for things that needed to take place. Students were in a dorm on a university in Austria, and we found out that they would not take a pro card for, paying for the dorm, or they wouldn't take we had to do an ACH payment. But then we had to get them set up in Payment Works. And it was international, and we're having a language barrier, and it took a long time, and students arrived and we had not made the payment to the dorm. And so it's like, okay, UTA is good for the money, but can you let our students stay here, and we're working on getting payment to you. And so that was a major headache. It's like, if we had a SOP that we knew we were following certain steps within a time frame, that would have been very helpful. The SOPs are great as a training tool when we have new staff, admin staff coming on board, and it's part of their first or second day, just sit here and review all these processes, to give you some job knowledge. So that's very, very helpful for us. It's also very helpful to have these when we have, turnover, and somebody is no longer here to say, okay, this is what you need to do, or this is what I did before. And so if that person is gone, you could be like, oh gosh, what do I do? And so if you have something documented, it's very beneficial. Listening to this today has been very, very helpful for me again. And, realizing that we do need to schedule some work sessions, and these bigger ones for the study abroad and the whole scholarship process for when you want to use that for recruitment, and where you start with, identifying, you working with advisors and identifying students that we would like to recruit, and just all the steps. And then, okay, what funds do we have? And, in communication with the students. So SOPs are very beneficial for processes like that.
So Teresa, would you say that when we started the work that people found a value for creating an SOP when we were first talking about?
For sure.
There was some resistance there of going, well, I know this, so why do I have to write this down?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I think the change that we're seeing now is that they're seeing a real value in having that written down.
Oh, for sure.
And as I was walking through the office, there was like 3 people in your office area that stopped me, and you were one of them. And it was like, well, training is so much easier. We just hand them this, go through this, see if you figure out what you can, come to me with questions, and it's speeding up the training very quickly. But as you said, documentation is a higher priority for you now. It's
Yes.
like, I don't want to go through this brain process of trying to figure this stuff out if I can define it ahead of time.
Right.
So,
and y'all mentioned scheduling time to review. And I know that I get very busy in my day-to-day things, and it's like, oh yeah, I need to review these. Well, I'm in charge of the staff meetings for Kappa, and we have one in June, and guess what the topic is going to be? Everybody's going to be there. All these 9 groups that took place in this are in that meeting, and that's going to be a review session.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So that kind of gives you, we have SOP templates, and we're happy to share any of these with you, but that gives you an idea of how we're using it on campus. I open it up to any discussion. I don't know how much more time we have. I think we have about 10 minutes, I believe. Do you think this would be useful on your campus? Do you have examples of what might be changes that might be good for the whole group to consider in making a change with the template? Anything in the chat or anything, Tabitha?
Well, I think Teresa kind of touched on it a little bit. We did have a question about the process person that's accountable doing the updates and the review rather than our team. So yes, that's something I address in the chat or the Q&A, but the accountable person does update or create. But some groups have a committee that does a full review. They kind of develop this cadence, which maybe 3 months, 6 months, depending on that group. In Teresa's case, they're dedicating a whole staff meeting, which is wonderful. So it really just depends. We do our best to make recommendations, meet the groups where they're at as far as that review. But yes, the accountable person is responsible for updating and creating.
Depending on the group, if they appear to be receptive, we talk about the stand-up meetings and how it can just be part of the stand-up meetings. Are there any processes that need to be addressed and so on? Okay.
Thank you so far. I think that this being in a webinar fashion, it's not that easy for people to pitch in, but we could still use that Q&A function to put questions in there. If there are thoughts or questions for you to answer. And also, I think to talk about for my part, it would be very interesting to be able to have a glance at some of your SOP templates. I know that this is an issue for many universities when they do process improvement. How do you actually create those good SOPs? There could be many traps to fall in, and to share some of those could help people to avoid that.
Tabitha, could you pull those up real quick, and then I'll let you share the screen, and you can show both of them. We have 2 versions of our SOP, because sometimes the version that people really should be using scares them. So if we can get them to do the simple version first, we at least get something down. But then the more complex version includes things like links to policies, what's upstream, downstream, actually a little process map, things like that. And that kind of scares people. So if we can just get the steps first, then we do well. So do you have them up, Tabitha?
Perfect. And I would say we've got about 5 minutes to go for that.
So we will provide any of these things, and you can get our emails from the coordinators here, or make note of them here They're just our first name, last name at uta.edu with a period in between. So I'm going to stop sharing, Tabitha, and let you share the templates.
Awesome. Okay, let's see here.
While she's pulling that up, our process inventory is built in Excel, and we have 3 tabs. And so we have the instructions tab, we have phase 1 tab, and we have phase 2 tab. When we build the RACI chart, we go in and we build individual staff members little tabs to show their stuff highlighted at the top so that they can easily see what they're responsible for. So Excel makes it real easy to work with this data. It's not as protected to be accidentally corrupted, but we always keep a master copy somewhere. Okay, Tabitha, go.
And you can see my screen, correct?
Yes, we can.
So this right here is the little bit more complex SOP. So depending on the group or the type of task or process that they're working on, especially if they have those downstream and upstream processes that have some dependencies and or inform future processes. We have in our part 1 here some of the related processes, which do help kind of determine what's being impacting this process, or again, what process this impacts. So we generally have the owner information. Again, we do want to encourage people to take ownership and or know who to contact. Say I'm a new employee coming in, I pull up this SOP, I have questions, or I'm working this process. I know that I need to contact Karen if I have questions, because that is something that we do see a struggle with. Department information, any process workers, if there is a mandated policy or something like that that does inform how this SOP is written, and or if it's, for example, something changes in that, we do need to update the SOP so we can kind of know where to find it. We also want to have the effective date, when it was created, when it was last reviewed, again, to help that cadence of when we do need to update the SOP. And moving on to part 2, that purpose or introduction is often captured from that process function within that process inventory Excel sheet. So it does kind of give a foundation and for folks a place to start. Definitions. We use this section a lot, especially with acronyms or types of systems. Even if there is, for example, we're pulling reports or a form, we might need to have what a type of student or type of query is for a particular report. So we heavily use and recommend this definition section. And then again, we also wanted to include that relationship structure here. Some groups really, again, those task-oriented need to understand how their process impacts others. Impacted audience, again, we do have some of this information in our Excel sheet. And then lastly, here for the SOP, we have the steps, and so people can provide screenshots. We also have the option for a flow chart. Once we get to the process, work in math, they can input it here. And then any revision log, and something that we are doing with groups, if there is any current documentation that's created that they may reference to how to process a travel request, that may be done at the university level, but there are some department specific information. So we do often have groups link out to something that's already created, and that way they don't have to recreate it. They can do department specific. And then really quick,
I'll let you pull the other one up, and while you do, looking at, depending on who the creator is, depends on which one they're going to use. For instance, student financial services, when they went through it, they immediately went to the more complex one because they're accustomed to thinking policies and report links and things like that. But the colleges tend to start with this one.
Thank you. And we have about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
Okay. So this one's really quick, really simple. It's just high level, especially groups starting out that don't have a lot of complexity. If it is truly task oriented, we have some basic information, effective review date, maybe that introduction, again, highly using definitions. and then the process. So again, this just may be simple steps, simple functions, and then the revision log. So I'll pause, make that quick, so we have another minute and a half maybe for questions.
There is something more of a comment again. Of people indicating this would be very useful in their institution, but also the typical thought of continuous improvement and doing work like this, that it comes on top of the work you do, and that there will be the need of having some kind of help with motivation going top down to actually get it done.
It is, and that's why I've said it's very nice that, I shouldn't say nice, but the change in leadership at our college, at our university, has motivated this work. And I did want to bring this back up so you can have our email addresses, but it's motivated the work to be done because their new leadership is asking them, well, who's responsible for this? How does this connect with this over here? And they're asking all these hard questions, and they've just been doing the tasks. They haven't, and they've been successful at doing it because everybody's such a hard worker, but it's finally getting us to where we might be able to streamline some things. So that's been part of our motivation, but otherwise you've got to have that leadership supporting it. Otherwise they're not going to be able to give it the time. When Teresa's college was doing it, they had a dean that was moving out of her role, and she wanted to make sure she left some solid documentation for the new dean. And the reason I was in her department as I was there meeting the new dean and talking about the process inventory and how he might use it and such. And so it provided that continuity.
Thank you so much. I think that we are in time, and I will just conclude this by thanking you so much, Karen and Tabitha and Misty, and also Teresa, for giving some of your time to talk about how you work and some of your insights. And before I hand the word over to John again for a conclusion, when it comes to SOP, standard operating procedures, probably many of you have seen on YouTube this brilliant video of a father and trying to educate children on how to do that with a SOP of making a jelly jam and peanut butter sandwich. And it's not very easy to actually create those good SOPs. So by that, I'm going to hand over to John for a conclusion, and still for the remaining few minutes of the webinar, we're able to put some comments in and questions to the Q&A. John.
Thank you, Svenara, and thanks very much, Karen, Tabitha, Misty, and Teresa. Excellent presentation, really thought-provoking. I think the whole issue of process owners, I think, is key in relation to universities are very complex organisations. We have, Linda was talking about 30-something colleges at the University of Cambridge earlier, and if you can imagine processes crossing 31 colleges, coming up with a process owner for a standard way of doing things, quite tricky. But if you can do that, huge benefits, in terms of getting that improvement, sort of culture embedded. So absolutely fantastic to hear. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen because when Linda was talking about the conference earlier on, she mentioned should I submit an abstract session. So hopefully you can see that screen, unless I've shared the wrong one. So there's a QR code on the screen. So if you are interested in attending this event, please do so. I think, as I said earlier, it doesn't really matter what stage you are on your lean journey, your continuous improvement journey. We can all learn from each other. Everyone, as I say, has a story to tell, regardless of the stage that you're at. So I think that's the first thing to say. So I would encourage you to come along to that. not to put you off, but I will be there. I know Svenara will be there, and Linda will obviously be there to talk about how we can help with this. So that's one thing. The next thing is really a call to action, really just to encourage you to stay connected with the Lean HE Europe community, the Lean HE global community, and there are various ways in which you can do that. We have a LinkedIn site for Lean HE Europe, so there's activity there. All the key events happening across the network are posted on there. So if you haven't already joined that group, I would encourage you to do so. It's set up in a way that it's for people who are working in a university in Europe. So we try to cut down on people trying to sell us stuff on LinkedIn. So it's only practitioners, and it's only content, hopefully, that is relevant to the work that we do. So I'd encourage you to do that. There's also the Lean HE Europe website, which has information on all the networks, the network leads, and also contains the Lean HE Europe newsletters. And the next edition of our newsletter, which will contain all of the great stuff that's been happening in Europe from basically the start of this year through until end of June. So it will cover all of that across all of our networks. There'll be something from every network in the next edition of the newsletter. So again, look out for that. And finally, our Lean HE Global YouTube channel. So there are currently 65 videos on the YouTube channel, from content from the conference in 2021, the conference in 2022, content from local network events that have been held, and now through the vehicle of Lean HE Encore, there are also a number of sessions from the San Diego conference as well. So as I say, if you haven't subscribed to that, please, I would encourage you to do so. There's lots of great stuff on that. So that's really all for today. So it's really just to thank you again for attending. And I very much look forward to seeing you at a Lean HE event sometime soon. So thank you very much, and goodbye.